The alpha pack mourned their pups until the human Omega walked in, dusted with snow, holding them. The alpha pack's territory lay silent, save for the occasional crack of ice under the weight of snow and the distant howl of wolves mourning under the pale moonlight. Inside the den, the grief was heavier than the winter cold. Kale, the alpha, stood at the edge of the hollow, staring into the darkness where the pups had vanished. He could feel the emptiness in the space they once filled, their absence echoing like a wound that refused to heal. The pack moved quietly around him, their heads bowed, their breaths shallow and uneven. Normally, the den buzzed with life, the sounds of small paws running, of playful growls and joyful yips. But now, the silence was suffocating. Kale's golden eyes glimmered with a mixture of pain and anger. He blamed himself, as the alpha always did. Every decision he had made, every path he had chosen, seemed to have led to this moment. A shiver ran through him, not from the cold, but from the weight of his own failure. The snowstorm that had stolen the pups was no ordinary winter tempest. The elders whispered about curses, old and bitter, lingering over the mountain that rose like a frozen sentinel on the horizon. Kale had never believed in such tales, yet the evidence was undeniable. The forest itself seemed darker now, the trees twisted in shapes that appeared almost alive under the moon's ghostly light. A soft rustle caught Kale's attention. His ears pricked up and his body tensed. Every wolf in the den froze, their instincts sharp, honed from generations of survival. Kale's gaze cut through the snow drifting across the clearing. At first, it was only a shadow, moving against the snow like a whisper. Then she appeared. A human figure, small yet strong, emerged from the storm. Snow clung to her hair and clothes, sparkling like diamonds under the dim moonlight. In her arms, she cradled something that immediately drew every eye in the den. The pups. They were alive. A collective gasp filled the den, a sound that felt almost sacrilegious in its wonder. Kale stepped forward, his breath misting in the cold air, unsure if his eyes deceived him. Each pup stirred in her arms, tiny breaths puffing in the freezing night. They had been lost, perhaps dead, but now here they were, wrapped in the arms of a human who had walked through the storm as if she belonged to the snow itself. Kale's heart, long buried under the weight of command and sorrow, skipped. He could not explain the sudden surge of relief, fear, and something deeper, something he had not felt in centuries. His golden gaze met hers. She had soft, haunting eyes, the color of winter shadows, and for a moment he saw not a stranger but a force of nature that both terrified and beckoned him. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low, roughened by weeks of sleepless nights and grief. The human did not speak immediately. She merely looked at him, steady and unafraid, her grip on the pups unwavering. Then softly, in a voice that seemed to carry the echo of ancient forests, she said, "I found them. They were not meant to be lost." The pack stirred uneasily. Wolves did not often trust humans, and certainly not one who appeared from a storm carrying pups thought dead. Kale's mind raced. Was she a witch, a spirit, or something else entirely? Yet, despite his caution, he could not deny the truth in her words. The pups were alive, warm against her chest, and not a single mark of the frost or storm touched them. Kale's body moved before his mind could stop him. He stepped closer, each movement deliberate, each breath a test of control. The pups wriggled slightly, tiny claws brushing her arms, but they did not cry. Instead, they seemed to sense her presence as safe, almost sacred. "Give them to me," Kale said, his voice firmer, commanding. She hesitated, her eyes locking on his. There was no fear there, only understanding and quiet strength. Slowly, carefully, she lowered the pups into his waiting arms. Kale felt their tiny bodies press against him, a warmth so vivid it almost burned through the cold. He closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of life he had feared lost forever. The den erupted in murmurs, the pack cautiously approaching, sniffing, watching. No one spoke, but every movement was filled with wonder and disbelief. Kale's mind swirled with questions, but the sight of the pups, alive, breathing, unbroken, demanded no answers just yet. The human stepped closer, snow sliding off her shoulders like silver dust. "They were not lost by chance," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor underneath, a hidden depth of emotion that drew Kale in, unnerving him. "Something took them, something that still watches. You must protect them." Kale's jaw tightened. He had always protected his pack, his duty carved into his soul. Yet for the first time he felt powerless. He could fight storms, rival packs, even the bite of winter itself, but what had taken his pups had been something beyond his strength. And now this human Omega, so small yet so unyielding, stood before him, a living answer to a question he hadn't dared to ask. "Who are you?" he repeated, this time softer, almost a whisper carried on the wind. "I am Lyra," she said. "I am someone who understands them. Someone who was meant to find them." Kale's ears twitched at the words, "meant to find them," as if fate itself had woven her into their story. He could feel the weight of the world pressing against him, a mix of awe and fear. Yet there was something undeniably true in her presence, a power that did not roar or bite but existed quietly, like a river flowing beneath ice. The pup stirred in his arms again, blinking up at him with small, trusting eyes. Kale felt a surge of something raw and ancient, a connection that went beyond words. He had mourned them, yes, but now there was a chance to heal, and that chance stood before him, human yet extraordinary, her eyes reflecting the same winter moonlight that bathed the forest. But then, as quickly as hope had blossomed, a sound cut through the silence, a howl. Not one of the pack, but something deeper, colder, unnatural. It echoed across the snowy expanse, a sound that carried both rage and sorrow. The pups shivered, their tiny bodies stiffening against Kale's chest. He turned, eyes narrowing, scanning the dark forest. Shadows shifted unnaturally between the trees, shapes that did not belong. Kale's instincts screamed at him. This was no ordinary threat. The curse that had haunted the pack, whispered of by the elders, was real, and it had not forgotten. Lyra stepped closer to Kale, placing a hand lightly on his arm. Her touch was warm, grounding him amidst the rising tension. "It knows I am here," she said softly, almost to herself. "It senses the pups, but it cannot touch them while I am near." Kale's gaze shifted to her, searching for certainty, but found only quiet determination. A human standing unafraid before a shadow older than the mountains themselves, a protector of the lives he had feared lost forever. The pack murmured uneasily around them, tension crackling like static. Every wolf instinctively knew danger was close, yet no one moved. They looked to Kale and through him to Lyra, waiting for guidance, protection, and hope. Kale's heart pounded in his chest. He had led his pack through storms, battles, and death. But this strange intersection of grief, magic, and human courage, was unlike anything he had ever faced. The pups, alive and trembling, pressed against his chest, unaware of the larger forces at play, yet their presence was enough to ignite a spark of resolve. He glanced at Lyra again. Her eyes were steady, holding secrets he could not yet understand. But something in her gaze spoke of strength, of destiny, of a bond that could not be broken by storm, shadow, or curse. Kale took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs, and made a decision. "You will stay with us," he said, his voice low, firm, leaving no room for argument. "If you are to hold them, then you will hold them here with us. We will protect them together." Lyra nodded, a faint smile brushing her lips, almost imperceptible yet filled with quiet triumph. She stepped fully into the den, snow melting on the stone floor beneath her feet, carrying with her a strange sense of hope that Kale had not felt in years. But even as relief washed over him, the howl came again, closer this time, more deliberate, filled with a darkness that seemed to seep into the den itself. The pups whimpered, and Kale felt a cold fury rise within him. Whoever or whatever had claimed them before had made a mistake. Kale's golden eyes met Lyra's once more. No words were needed. Together they would face the shadows. Together they would protect the pack. And in the silence that followed, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a warning that the night was far from over. The wind had quieted by the time dawn crept over the horizon, pale light stretching across the snowy forest. The pack had huddled closer to the den, wary and tense. Kale paced along the frost-covered ground, his golden eyes never leaving the tree line where shadows had moved the night before. The howl had not been ordinary, it had carried a weight, a hunger, a memory of the pups lost. And now that they were found, the dark force would not leave them be. Lyra sat near the pups, watching them stir and explore, their tiny legs wobbling under the weight of new life. She hummed softly, a sound that seemed to make the snow around them shimmer faintly, and the pups' tiny ears twitched, their trust in her complete. The pack observed silently, curiosity and suspicion mingling with awe. None had seen a human who could hold wolves and wolf pups with such calm certainty. Kale stopped his pacing and approached her. "How did you find them?" His voice was low, more a question of disbelief than curiosity. Lyra's eyes, shadowed by the morning light, met his. "I was guided," she said simply. "By the forest, by the snow, and by something older than you or I." Her words were cryptic, but there was conviction behind them. She did not falter under Kale's piercing gaze. The alpha's ears twitched. Wolves could sense lies, deceit, or hesitation, and there was none here. Something about her presence was solid, unshakable, like the frozen mountains themselves. He felt a spark of trust, fragile but real, and it unsettled him. Kale was used to command, to control, to know all things. Lyra defied that instinct quietly, and he found it both dangerous and compelling. "You do not speak like a human lost in the wild," Kale said, his voice softer now, curious despite himself. "Your calm, it unnerves them." He gestured toward the pups, who were now crawling toward her, squeaking in delight. Lyra's lips curved slightly in a faint smile. "I am not just human," she said, almost in a whisper. "I am something different, something meant to protect them." Kale blinked, the weight of her words settling on him. He wanted to question her further, to demand proof, but the calm certainty in her gaze made him hesitate. Before he could speak, one of the pups let out a small, panicked yelp. Kale's body moved instinctively, a growl building in his throat. The hairs along his back rose as he turned toward the edge of the clearing. Shadows stirred again, darker than the morning light, moving faster than snow could drift. The air grew cold, biting into their fur and skin alike. Lyra stood, positioning herself between Kale and the pups. Her arms were steady, but her eyes were alert, scanning the forest as though reading invisible threats. "It is near," she said quietly. "It senses fear and it senses the pups, but it cannot harm them while I am here." Kale's heart thudded in his chest. Wolves did not trust humans easily, but he felt the truth of her words in his very bones. Still, he could not allow complacency. "Then we will not wait here," he said, his voice firm. "We need to understand what we are facing." Lyra nodded. She picked up one of the pups and tucked it safely against her chest, the other wriggling toward Kale's hand. The pack followed their alpha silently, forming a protective circle as they moved into the snowy forest, leaving the den behind. The journey was tense. Snow crunched under paw and foot, the trees looming like silent watchers, their branches heavy with frost. Every so often a shadow would shift, a whisper of movement, and the pack would halt, ears high, teeth bared. Kale felt the familiar pull of the alpha's instinct: protect, lead, survive. But it was tempered by something new: uncertainty. He had never faced an enemy so elusive, so rooted in mystery, and yet he felt a strange comfort knowing Lyra was with him. "You are not afraid?" Kale asked, glancing at her. Lyra shook her head, her dark hair falling across her shoulders. "Fear is not useful here. It will only guide the shadows to you. You must remain steady, and so must I." Her calmness was contagious. Even the pack seemed to move with more confidence, their ears pricked and eyes sharp. Kale found himself drawn to her, not just because of her bravery, but because she carried an understanding he had not seen in centuries, a knowledge of life and death, loss and hope, that resonated with him in ways he could not yet name. Hours passed as they moved deeper into the forest. The snow grew thicker, the trees denser, and the shadows more deliberate. The pups, curious despite their small size, followed as best they could, guided by Kale and Lyra. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying fragments of sounds, howls, faint voices, and echoes of something older, something hungry. Finally, they reached a small clearing where the snow had been disturbed, churned into strange patterns, almost like markings or sigils. Kale lowered his nose to the ground, sniffing. The scent was strong, wolves, yes, but also something else, something unnatural. The air felt heavier here, charged with a presence that made even the alpha's hackles rise. Lyra stepped forward, tracing the markings with a gloved hand. "This is the work of the shadow," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "It moves through grief and fear. It takes what is precious when hearts are heavy. It thought it had claimed them, but I was stronger." Kale's eyes narrowed. "Stronger, you are human," she smiled faintly. "I am more than human," she said. "I am tied to them, to the pups, to this forest, and perhaps to you." Kale's breath caught. He had spent centuries in command, relying on strength and instinct, never needing anyone else. Yet her words, spoken so quietly and without arrogance, struck him in a place long buried, a longing for connection, for understanding, for something beyond the hunt and the pack. The shadow stirred again, a ripple through the trees, as if the forest itself exhaled in warning. Kale growled low, stepping in front of the pups. The pack followed suit, forming a tight circle. Lyra raised her hand slightly, a gesture more instinctive than learned, and the pups huddled closer to her, their bodies calm in her presence. "This is not the end," she said, her eyes scanning the forest. "It will test us. It will try again. And it will come for the strongest bond here, when it cannot touch unless we falter." Kale's eyes met hers, and he saw in them something he had not seen in a long time: determination. Not just to survive, but to protect, to endure, to fight alongside him rather than under him or apart from him. It unsettled him, yet the feeling was intoxicating. Hours turned into night once more, the snow falling silently, blanketing the forest in white. The pups were placed in a small hollow, safe for the moment, though Kale never let his gaze leave them. Lyra remained beside him, her presence a shield, a comfort, and a mystery all at once. "You have power," Kale said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Power I cannot name. But it is undeniable." Lyra's lips curved into a small, enigmatic smile. "Power is only useful when guided by heart and purpose. Fear and anger are easy. Control, strength, and care, those are harder. That is why I am here." Kale looked at her then, really looked, and felt a stirring in his chest he had not felt in centuries. A mixture of awe, respect, and something else, something he could not yet define. She was human, yes, but unlike any human he had known. She was a force of nature, as vital as the forest, as essential as the snow, as enduring as the moonlight that guided them through darkness. A sudden howl split the night, closer this time, more urgent. The pack tensed, ears flat against heads, teeth bared. The shadow had come closer, drawn by the same bond Lyra held with the pups. Kale stepped forward, growl low in his throat, the alpha asserting his presence. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the confrontation to begin. Lyra touched his arm lightly. "Do not strike until I say," she whispered. "This is not a battle of strength. This is a test of heart." Kale's gaze softened, though his body remained coiled and ready. The pack looked to him for direction, and he gave none, trusting instead in the human beside him, a stranger yet protector, guide yet mystery. The shadow moved again, circling them, its presence more tangible now, a cold, twisted form that seemed to draw its strength from fear and grief. The pups whimpered slightly, sensing the tension but not panic, not while Lyra was near. Kale's golden eyes locked on hers. "Then we face it together," he said. Lyra nodded, a spark of pride in her dark eyes. "Together," she echoed. The wind rose, carrying snow and whispers of old magic. The forest seemed alive, watching, waiting, and Kale felt the weight of the centuries on his shoulders, the burden of leadership, the sharp edge of grief. But also, for the first time in a long while, hope. The shadow was close. And soon, Kale realized, it would have to choose its approach carefully, for here stood an alpha and a human omega bound by more than circumstance, a bond of survival, of protection, and something yet unnamed, something stronger than fear. The shadow waited at the edge of the clearing, silent and still, but Kale felt its presence like a weight pressing down on the snow. It was not just darkness, it was a living grief, a memory of loss twisted into something hungry and bitter. The pups huddled closer to Lyra, sensing her calm, their small bodies trembling but not with fear, only anticipation. Kale stepped forward, muscles coiled, his breath visible in the cold air. The pack circled behind him, a living barrier of loyalty and strength. Even in the silence, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what was to come. The shadow shifted, revealing itself slowly. Its form was strange and fluid, darker than the blackest night, with limbs that seemed to stretch and fade into the snow. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the pale moonlight like embers. Kale growled, low and warning, but it did not move. It was testing them, feeling the strength and fear in the alpha, in the pack, in the human who held the pups with such quiet authority. Lyra stepped forward, the pups in her arms, her gaze steady. "It cannot touch them," she said softly, almost a chant. Her voice carried through the clearing, soft and melodic, and Kale could feel the air around them shift. The shadow hesitated as if uncertain, and for the first time, Kale realized that Lyra's power was not just protective. It was binding, a force of light within the darkness. Kale's heart thudded in his chest. He had never seen magic so subtle yet so absolute. The shadow which had claimed the pups once was now uncertain, and Kale, alpha of the strongest pack in the region, felt a flicker of hope he had thought lost forever. "You must face it," Lyra said, her voice low but firm. "Do not falter. It feeds on doubt and fear. If you hesitate, even for a moment, it will strike." Kale met her gaze, seeing not just words but certainty, a strength he could rely on. He nodded slightly, signaling the pack to hold their positions. "We face it together," he said, his voice carrying through the snow-laden trees. The shadow advanced slowly, moving like liquid darkness over the frozen ground. Kale stepped forward, body tense, every muscle ready. The pack moved with him, a coordinated, living wall of protection. Lyra's hands rested lightly on the pups, their trust in her absolute, and Kale felt a surge of admiration and something deeper, a pull he could not name. The first strike came swiftly. The shadow lunged like a jagged wind, a rush of cold and darkness. Kale reacted instantly, moving to intercept, claws out, teeth bared. The pack followed, a storm of fur and motion, and for a moment it seemed the shadow would overwhelm them. But Lyra's voice rose, calm and commanding, weaving through the storm of motion. The snow around her shimmered faintly, glowing like frost kissed by moonlight. The shadow froze, faltering under the strange, gentle force she exuded. Kale saw it hesitate, unsure, and he realized that she was more than human. She was a protector, a guide, a force that could bind even the most twisted darkness. Kale lunged again, this time with precision, driving the shadow back, but it did not vanish. It recoiled, then reshaped itself, more menacing now, drawing strength from the fear it sensed in the forest. The alpha and his pack fought with every ounce of strength, but Kale knew brute force alone would not win this battle. "Kale," Lyra called, stepping forward. Her eyes glowed faintly and the snow beneath her feet shimmered. Trust me completely." Kale's gaze met hers and something passed between them, unspoken and electric. He understood now. To save the pups, to protect the pack, he had to let go of doubt, of control and trust in her. With a deep breath, he allowed himself to step back slightly, opening space for her power to flow. Lyra raised her hands, the air around her shimmering with soft light. She spoke words that Kale could not understand, but their effect was immediate. The shadow shrieked, a sound that chilled the bones and recoiled further, its form breaking apart like smoke in the wind. The pups yipped and wriggled, sensing safety, while the pack watched in awe. The shadow, however, was not gone. It lingered at the edge of the clearing, its form thinner now, more desperate, more cunning. It circled, waiting for another opportunity, testing the strength of Kale, Lyra, and the pack. Kale's golden eyes met Lyra's once more. "Can you end it?" he asked quietly, a hint of worry threading his voice. Lyra shook her head. "Not yet. It is tied to the forest, to the grief that created it. But we can contain it, hold it back, and protect the pups." Her gaze softened as she looked at the little creatures nestled against her chest. "That is all that matters now." The alpha nodded, understanding that this battle was as much about restraint as strength, about care as power. He glanced at the pack, their eyes wide with awe and trust, and felt a deep pride in their unity. Together they had faced countless threats, but none like this, none that tested not only their bodies but their hearts. Night fell fully over the forest, the moon casting silver light over the snow. Lyra stayed close to the pups, moving with quiet authority while Kale patrolled the perimeter. He could feel the shadow lingering, restless and patient. And yet, he no longer felt alone. For the first time in centuries, Kale felt something that went beyond duty or instinct. He felt a bond forming, fragile but undeniable, between him and Lyra. It was not love yet, not fully, but it was the beginning, a spark born of trust, shared struggle, and mutual respect. Hours passed, and the shadow's attacks became less frequent, less forceful. Lyra whispered softly to the pups, and the forest seemed to respond, the snow glowing faintly under the moonlight. Kale watched her, captivated by the grace and strength she displayed, the way she moved and commanded without fear. He realized that she was not just protecting the pups, she was teaching him something he had long forgotten, that power alone was not enough, that courage and heart could be stronger than claws or teeth. The pups finally settled, curling against her for warmth. Kale approached slowly, not wanting to disturb the fragile calm. He knelt beside Lyra, the snow cold beneath his knees, and placed a hand gently on hers. "You are extraordinary," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Lyra's lips curved into a faint smile. "So are you, Kale, strong, loyal, and capable of more than you believe." Kale looked down at her, and in that moment he realized something he had not expected. He trusted her completely. Not just with the pups, not just with the pack, but with himself. And in the quiet of the snowy forest, surrounded by shadows and light, he felt the first flicker of hope for the future. A future where the pack could heal, where the pups could thrive, and where perhaps he and Lyra could face what came next together. But the forest was never fully silent. A rustle of movement, a whisper of shadow among the trees, reminded him that danger was always near. The shadow was not defeated, only contained. It would return, testing their bond, testing their strength. And Kale knew that the next encounter would demand even more courage, more trust, more unity between him and Lyra. He rose, standing tall beside her, feeling the warmth of the pups against his chest and the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The pack gathered close, their eyes alert, ready to follow him into whatever darkness awaited. Lyra stepped beside him, her hand brushing lightly against his arm, and Kale felt a calm he had not known in years. Together, they were stronger. Together, they could face the shadows. And together, they would protect the little lives that had been given back to them against impossible odds. The wind rose again, carrying the faint sound of movement from the deeper forest. Kale's ears twitched, every instinct alert, but this time he was not afraid. He had Lyra at his side, and for the first time he believed that even the darkest shadow could be held at bay if they faced it together. The forest was silent, blanketed in thick snow that muffled every sound. The pale light of dawn struggled through the dense trees, casting long shadows that twisted and swayed like living things. Kale stood at the edge of the clearing, golden eyes scanning every movement, every whisper of wind. The shadow had retreated the night before, but its presence lingered, cold and threatening, like a storm waiting to break. Lyra stood beside him, holding one of the pups close to her chest. The other pups nuzzled against Kale, their tiny bodies warm and alive, a reminder of what they fought for. The pack moved around them, alert and tense, ready to follow Kale's command. Silence stretched, heavy with anticipation, and for a moment the forest seemed suspended in time. Kale's voice broke the stillness. "It will come, we know it, and when it does, we must be ready." Lyra's gaze met his, steady and unwavering. "Then we face it together," she said. Her words carried the certainty of someone who had walked through storms and shadows before, someone who had seen fear and chosen courage instead. Kale felt a stir in his chest, a pull that went beyond respect. He realized that she was no longer just a protector of the pups, she had become a part of his pack, and of him. The shadow appeared suddenly, emerging from the forest like smoke made solid. It moved faster than thought, circling the clearing, its form flickering and twisting, darker than the blackest night. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting a hunger and malice that had taken the pups once. Kale growled, a low, warning sound, and the pack responded immediately, forming a barrier between the shadow and the pups. Every muscle in his body was tense, every sense alert. The forest itself seemed to lean in, waiting, as if it too understood the stakes of this confrontation. Lyra stepped forward, her hand raised, and spoke words that Kale could not understand. The snow around her shimmered faintly, glowing with a soft, silver light. The shadow recoiled slightly, sensing her power, but it did not retreat entirely. It had grown stronger since last night, fueled by its own rage and the lingering grief it carried. Kale moved beside her, his presence grounding her, the two of them forming a line of strength and trust. The pack flanked them, silent but ready, each wolf radiating loyalty and determination. Kale realized that this battle was not just about strength, but about unity, about the bond between them and the pups. The shadow struck first, a jagged surge of darkness that rushed across the snow. Kale met it head-on, claws slashing, teeth bared, while the pack surged to intercept it. The shadow twisted and flowed, faster than the eye could follow, but Lyra's voice rang clear and strong, anchoring the pups and the pack alike. The snow around her shimmered, forming a barrier of light that pushed back the darkness, forcing it to pause. Kale lunged again, driving the shadow back with every ounce of strength he had. Yet the darkness was resilient, bending and shaping itself around his attacks, feeding on the cold fear that lingered in the forest. He realized that brute force alone would not be enough. "Trust me," Lyra called, her voice carrying over the wind. Her eyes glowed faintly, and the snow beneath her feet shimmered as though alive. Kale met her gaze, feeling the pull of her certainty. He knew now that to protect the pups, he had to trust her completely, not just with their lives, but with his own. He stepped back slightly, opening space for her power to flow, and the shadow faltered. It shrieked, a sound that pierced the night, twisting in anger and confusion. Kale's chest heaved, heart pounding, as he watched Lyra's presence hold the darkness at bay. She was more than human, more than protector. She was a force that could bend grief and rage into nothing. The shadow surged one last time, more desperate than ever, striking with a speed and ferocity that tested every member of the pack. Kale met it with a roar, body moving instinctively, protecting the pups, flanking wolves and Lyra alike. The air crackled with tension, snow swirling violently around them, the forest alive with the energy of the clash. Then Lyra spoke, her voice clear and commanding, and the snow around her erupted in soft silver light. The shadow froze, writhing and twisting as if caught between worlds. Kale felt the pulse of her power, strong and steady, and he realized that it was not just strength or magic that held the shadow, it was heart. The bond she shared with the pups, with the forest, with him, was a force the darkness could not understand. Kale stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on her arm. "Together," he said, voice low but filled with resolve. Lyra nodded, and the two of them moved as one, the pack flanking them in perfect harmony. The shadow shrieked, its form dissolving into mist, then coalescing again, each attempt weaker than the last. Kale and Lyra pressed forward, their presence a combination of strength, courage, and care. The pups nestled closer to her chest, sensing the victory within reach, their tiny bodies trembling but calm. Finally, with a last, desperate wail, the shadow shattered, scattering into the wind like smoke in the sun. The forest seemed to exhale, the snow settling around them calm once more. The threat had passed, but Kale knew this was not just the end. It was a transformation. He knelt beside Lyra, placing a hand gently on the snow near her. "It is done," he said, though the words felt almost fragile against the enormity of what they had faced. Lyra smiled, a soft, quiet expression that warmed even the coldest winter air. "For now," she said, "the forest remembers, but it will rest, and the pups are safe." Kale's eyes fell on the little creatures, alive and thriving, their tiny eyes blinking up at him with trust and wonder. A warmth spread through his chest, a mixture of relief, pride, and something deeper he could not name. The grief that had haunted him for so long seemed to lift, replaced by hope, and by a bond that had grown stronger than any shadow. The pack gathered around them, moving closer, sniffing and nuzzling the pups in reassurance. Kale felt a swell of pride and affection, not just for the pups, but for the family he led, for the bond they shared, and for the human who had walked into their grief and restored their future. Lyra stepped closer to Kale, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. "You are strong," she said softly, almost a whisper. "But you are stronger with trust, with care. That is the bond the shadow could not break." Kale's golden eyes met hers, and in that moment he saw not just courage, but understanding, respect, and a quiet affection that had grown in the shadow of danger. He realized that this bond, fragile but unbreakable, was the true strength of the pack, the heart that would guide them through storms, darkness, and uncertainty. The pups yipped and wriggled, their small bodies a reminder of what they had fought for. Kale reached down, lifting one gently into his arms, feeling the warmth of life against him. Lyra knelt beside him, placing another pup safely in his arms, and the two of them shared a quiet moment, watching the tiny creatures blink up at them. The forest was calm now, the snow glistening in the pale light, and the shadows had retreated. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a promise of safety and renewal. Kale felt the weight of centuries lift from his shoulders, replaced by the lightness of hope and the certainty that together they could face whatever came next. He stood slowly, the pup secure in his arms, and turned to Lyra. "You are a part of this pack now," he said, voice low but firm. "Not just protector but family, and I trust you." Lyra's eyes softened and she nodded. "And I trust you, Kale, with them, with the pack, and with you." The golden sunlight of dawn broke fully through the trees, casting long shadows and painting the snow in warm light. The pups yipped in delight, scampering slightly, and Kale felt the stirrings of joy he had thought lost forever. The pack moved closer, forming a protective circle around them, their howls rising in quiet celebration of survival, of family, and of hope. Kale and Lyra stood together, side by side, watching the pups explore their restored world. The bond between them, tested in shadow and forged in trust, had become unbreakable. The forest, once filled with grief and darkness, now carried the promise of new beginnings, laughter and love born not of fate alone, but of courage, care, and unwavering devotion. Even as the sun climbed higher, Kale's golden eyes swept over the forest, alert but calm. The shadows may return someday, but they would never find the pack unprepared again. Not with Lyra by his side, not with the strength and unity they had built, and not with the hope that had risen from the coldest winter night. And in that moment, with the wind carrying whispers of frost and light, Kale realized something more profound than survival or victory. He had found a partner, an equal, and perhaps something like love, in the human Omega who had walked into the storm carrying life, hope, and the promise of tomorrow. The forest sighed in quiet agreement, the snow sparkling under the rising sun, and Kale, Lyra, and the pack knew that they were ready. Whatever challenges came next, they would face them together, stronger, united, and unafraid.